All right, we should be live right now, at least looking at what I have here on YouTube's back end. I probably saw a couple of seconds of me just kind of standing there, getting everything set up, but we are live here from downtown in Austin. Hopefully, yep, microphone looks good, everything seems to be running pretty right. Yeah, we're doing this live out in the field today. Wanted to do something a little bit different than what we've normally been doing for these kinds of streams. Now that we're into December and kind of, winding down the year, wanted to provide some tips and, kind of give you guys a little bit of a behind the scenes look into, some of the other things that I do for Lumix, for the company. And a lot of that is creating training content videos and basically working with our cameras very much like how a lot of you do. So wanted to show you guys some of my kit, what I've primarily been shooting a lot of my content on for our internal teams, things like that. Basically just doing some of this, but training people on how to use the cameras. But at the same time, actually just give everybody an opportunity and just kind of have an open forum for a conversation. We're going to stream for probably about 45 minutes here. It is very overcast and cloudy here in Austin, so wanted to, I have to keep a little bit of an eye on the weather. But yeah, the camera is all set up. If you looked over at our Instagram stories, you can see how I have the camera set up. So if that's something that you're interested in seeing, make sure to go take a look at our Instagram stories. One thing I just want to double check. All right, cool. Audio is definitely coming through. So, yeah, if you are new to these streams, this is a little bit of a different one than we normally do. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time to talk about everything. Cameras, technology, and sometimes we even do the interviews with photographers and videographers out there. But ultimately, these streams are interactive. These are conversations we have with all of you to be able to answer questions that you may have about your cameras or different settings or how you use, X, Y, or Z on the camera. And the cool thing is we get to use this opportunity sometimes to show off some of the cool features and tech that we're using on these cameras. So as an example here, I'm just going to make sure that YouTube is doing this correctly. We are using the GH5 Mark II to broadcast, to stream with today. And I'm using the new firmware update that we just recently released. This firmware update, we covered it, was it last stream or the stream before? They all kind of are blurring a little bit together this time of year. But we talked about the update and what it brought, and one of those things is wired, tethered USB streaming for mobile devices. And why is that kind of a cool thing, something new that's added to these cameras when we've been doing wireless streaming since the camera came out? And the biggest thing is that if you're watching this stream in YouTube and you happen to be on, as far as I remember, I haven't checked it in Safari recently, but if you're using Google Chrome, you should be able to look at the quality settings right now. And one of the things that you'll notice is that we are actually broadcasting this in 4K 30p. So we're utilizing the new addition that came to the camera to try out the new streaming that we can do. Normally we stream these broadcasts at 1080 60p. It's a relatively strong bit depth, or not bit depth, relatively strong bit rate that we stream at. For most cases, when we're streaming back in the studio, we're broadcasting 1080 60p, and I'm using about 10,000 kilobits, that's about 10 megabit, to do the broadcasting, so that I know that I've got a good enough quality, and it's actually above what YouTube's normal recommendation is. They're up to around 9 megabit per second is what they recommend, anywhere between 6 to 9. So I know that, one, I've got more than enough bandwidth to actually do that at home, but for the most part, a lot of times when you're out in the field, you may not have that much bandwidth, so the wireless streaming functionality we added into the camera gives us a number of different options. You have from 720p at around 3 to 6 megabit per second, which is great for things like Facebook Live, stuff like that. Or you can go up to, now with the wired tethering, you can do 4K 30p at 12.5 megabit per second. And 12.5 megabit per second is a bit of a, kind of on-purpose choice. In a lot of cases, you're not going to have necessarily, say, a really strong 5G connection on your mobile device. You may not even have true 5G. You may be sub-6. And that can cause some challenges for some people out in the field. But if you do have the ability to have a really strong wireless network on your mobile device, this means that you could be streaming like what we're doing, 4K 30p, 12.5 megabits per second, or I could have done 1080p 60 frames at the 16 megabit per second. So a couple things that we really try to explain to people that do ask the questions, because I do get these questions a lot in the Lumix Live email box, is how do you know if you've got enough upload speed for this broadcasting? And we've touched on it a couple of times during Lumix Live over the last year. For a mobile device, quite simply, I just use the, what is it called, speed test. I think it's from Ookla or Ookla. I use that app, just run a quick test in the location that I'm going to be streaming from, and that'll give me a really good idea of what my upload speeds are. Here in Austin, it's really nice that we've got, really solid 5G connections here, especially in the park that I'm at. So it allows me to do basically any of the streaming that I want to do. Now, if I get into downtown, which I wanted to do this from, it's a little too noisy, and you do run into some challenges there for millimeter wave 5G. But yeah, so we're here. If you are looking, if you are watching this, make sure to check your stream settings, and you should be able to be seeing the 4K broadcast. You can also see the 1440p, which in some cases, if you've got a 1440p monitor, why not? But yeah, so as we go through the stream, let me know what you think of the quality. This is the first time I'm actually really broadcasting in the 4K. Normally we're going to go back to the 1080 60p because truthfully that's just usually what I prefer to stream in. But yeah, so let's see in the chat what we've got. How's it going, everybody? Hello from Italy. Hello from the US. I want good AF on the S series. We have good AF on the S series. There's a lot of things, and it's actually one of the things that I'm going to talk about with the S series cameras, how I use them for training videos. A lot of my setup maybe not necessarily, is going to mesh with how you shoot, but hopefully maybe some of the things that I can share may give you some, guidance into how you can set your camera up for these different scenarios. I know that we get a lot of questions like that in a lot of the forums and also in our email address. So just as a reminder, if you have a question for me during the stream, and it's any topic, this is a general Q&A stream as well. So feel free to tag us. It's at Lumix Cameras in the chat. And I'll be able to see it pop up here, and then we can address it. So let's see here. I see we've got a couple questions have come in. Hello, Redbit. Let's see, can you please enable full sensor slow motion recording to an Atomos Ninja 5 on a Lumix S5? I think it would be a great selling point and features from both. TN, so high-speed recording in a lot of cameras, it's not whether or not you just want to enable a full sensor scan. A lot of times, actually almost really all the time, it comes down to what is the hardware's capability to read out that sensor. So just because, like with the S-Series cameras, you'll notice, like if you want to do 4K 60p, it goes into a Super 35 crop mode because that's the readout area that the sensor can reach 60 frames per second. And it also hits the quality targets that we set for the cameras. If you've been following Lumix for a very long time, you know that we're very quality first. And in pretty much every case, you're going to find that a lot of times our picture quality is going to be above most others out there, and especially in the packages that you're looking at. I mean, we're filming on a GH5 Mark II, as I've said numerous times. Those cameras, because they're Micro Four Thirds sensors, do have inherently a much faster readout from the full sensor region. So if you're looking at wanting to be able to do full sensor, higher speed filming, the Micro Four Thirds platform, it's one of its kind of core strengths. It can get a lot faster than most of the full frame sensors out there. Yes, there are some exceptions, but a lot of times it's either you end up going in with line skipping, which a lot of people end up not liking the look because of the stair-stepping effect. So, yeah, something like full sensor for slow motion as a firmware update is 99% sure it's not going to happen because it's hardware bound. Let's see here. Fish says, hello, can you send or recommend budget-friendly external monitors for the G9 for video? This can really just depend on what kind of monitor you want. Are you looking for just a straightforward monitor, or are you looking for something that can also double as a recorder? That can be the big differentiation for your particular setup. Okay, and all of a sudden the questions are coming in the back end now. Okay, there they go. Not most of the time, the monitors that I use, it's either going to be one of the port key solutions. So recently I've been using the BM5, I think it's like Mark III, or the WR is the most recent one because of its integration in with the BGH1 and the BS1H box cameras. That allows you to have full menu control over USB, stuff like that. So it's a big quality of life improvement, and they're relatively inexpensive. And it's a decently bright display as well. So you've got a really good, kind of tool to work with. If you know that you want to be recording externally, then you're kind of bound by really like the top two main, kind of recorders that you have out there. The Atomos Ninja 5, not the 5 Plus. The original Ninja 5 is a really solid option. I've got one that I use often if I want to be recording ProRes RAW. A little bit more expensive would be the Blackmagic Video Assist. You got to make sure that you do the 12G if you're in something a little bit higher. The thing with those monitors is that because you're on, I believe you said a G9, the RAW side of it's not going to be a big deal for you since those cameras can't do RAW over HDMI. But yeah, realistically, you're probably going to want to look to spend somewhere, at least by my logic, you're going to want to spend somewhere between $450 to $600 on a monitor. I'm a big proponent of don't buy cheap just to buy cheap. You'll end up replacing it often. And you typically run into quality issues with lesser expensive monitors. So use it as an opportunity to invest in something that's going to actually, kind of grow with you and provide the tools you need the monitor to provide you. So hopefully, it's a very long-winded answer, Fish, sorry, but let's see here, Redbit. Feature request. Please add the option to switch off HDMI audio output to improve on HDMI lag. For the S1, it's already there in the S1H. I can definitely pass that on to our engineers. I know cameras like the GH5 have it. I would have to double check. It's not in the HDMI out menu and it's not in the main camera menu. So yeah, I'll take a look and pass that on to our team, Redbit. Let's see here. Any chance to have the 30-minute recording limitation in S5 removed? No. The S5, if you purchased an S5 and you got into an S5, it's probably my favorite of our full-frame cameras outside of my full-spectrum S1R, but that's because they're for very different purposes. The 30-minute limitation on the S5 it's thermal. That camera is designed to, when you're doing something like 4K, 60p, 10-bit, you're pumping a ton of heat through that body. There's a reason why the S1 and the S1H and even the S1R are designed the way that they are. They're larger cameras, they're bigger, they have much more mass to dissipate heat. The S5 does an amazing job at dissipating a ton of thermal load from the sensor and the processor, but you have to look at what your image quality targets are. The hotter a camera gets, the worse your image quality is. It really does go hand in hand. The S5 is designed to be very balanced in that case. Truthfully, if you're doing very long form recording where you know you need much longer than 30 minutes in a camera, that's 9 out of 10 times. That's where I usually suggest someone record to, something like an Atomos or the video assists, especially on the S5, since you have access to things like Prores Raw and Blackmagic Raw, depending on the recorder. Again, that's going to depend a little bit on your workflow, but most cases, if you know that you need to be recording much longer term and you need to keep a smaller, compact package, that's really where the S1 has a big lead over the S5, and definitely where the S1H, really, really soars above it, if you're staying in full frame. If you're looking at Micro Four Thirds, though, that's where you can go to something like a GH5 Mark II. It's less expensive than an S5. It gives you the same recording modes and more. Obviously, if streaming is one of the things that you do, it gives you the streaming functionality like we're doing here. So it gets you a lot of that stuff. And it's still going to be just as solid as the other cameras. In fact, in a lot of cases, like we were just saying before about high speed and slow motion recording, it's going to give you more flexibility in that case. So I think a lot of times we look into this, you want one camera to do everything across the board. You want it to do all of it perfectly. And while a lot of cameras, get very, very, very close to that, like our S1H, I would argue is probably still one of the best, content creation tools. Whether you're a photographer or a videographer, it is a solid platform. There are times where you may look at it, and if you need long form recording, GH series Micro Four Thirds probably may suit you better. And a lot of the conversations I see online about, low light performance on an S series is going to be better than a GH series. Well, yes, to a point. But no one I've ever asked can define what they mean by low light. I saw an amazing video on the Facebook groups yesterday from a show, like a concert film. And that was, I really feel bad that I can't remember the person's name, but it's in one of the Facebook, I think it's one of the GH5 groups. That is low light. Yes, there's a ton of laser lights and you have stadium lights and stuff like that, but it's still low light. It just kind of, people, I think, like to just say low light, but it's going to be very dependent on what you determine. So, so for something like that, to bring this all the way back to the 30-minute limit, the Micro Four Thirds cameras are going to be better for size, weight, and very long form recording, unless you want to go all the way up to something like an S1H. Let's see here. Hello from Vancouver. Hello, JD3. You can confirm Safari is able to natively utilize 4K. Cool. Stream's looking great, perhaps a little overexposed. Yeah, I had to overexpose it a little bit because the cloud cover keeps getting dark and then coming back and then getting dark and then coming back. So I picked a little bit overexposed. I can knock it down a little bit if everyone would prefer. Just let me know in the chat. Let's see here. About your broadcasting quality, sensible difference passing from HD to 4K, yet your video seems focused on you behind the grass. Oh, yeah, that's my fault. Hang on. Have to fix my screens. All right, so let's see here. So this should be a little bit better. That was my fault. I totally forgot to reset my focus settings before. So let's see here. JD3, I think it mainly depends on your editing software of choice. ProRes, not sure if I saw where that question was. Okay, about your broadcast. Okay, no, that's the one that I did read before. JD, that looks like that question got backed out a little bit. Let's see here. TN says, does the S1H have the same sensor as the S5 but allow for full frame sensor high-speed recording? No. They have very, very similar sensors. One of the things to remember is that the S1H carries an optical low-pass filter. So what that means is that if you're shooting scenarios where you've got heavy repeating patterns, so if you're a wedding photographer or videographer, you're probably going to want to go with something like an S1H over an S5 or an S1, even an S1R if you're one of the people that uses that camera for video. And that's mainly because of that low-pass filter. The low-pass filter will do a lot to really kind of mute down instances of moire, which can cause some challenges for some people. And now that the sun is lightly coming back, I have to up the brightness on my laptop so I can actually read my questions. So the S1H, it's the same. It does Super 35 for high-speed filming. But the S1H does have, this is where it's a little different depending on what you're trying to shoot. The S1H has more high-speed modes in it than an S5 does, though. The S1H can also let you do native 120 frames per second in 1080p out of that Super 35 region, and you can also do 4K 48p in Super 35. So not variable frame rate, which means you're going to get 10-bit footage out of it. You're going to have audio with autofocus. So it could definitely be a big boost up for slow motion creation if you're looking to get the overall better quality package out of it. Let's see here. Which cameras? Sparking another. Okay, so from let's see here. Thanks for your answer. It's sparking another question though. Any preference between ProRes and Blackmagic Raw? This is an age-old question that will never have a clear answer. Outside of the fact that I think JD, I think, sums it up pretty well for it as a very, just as he says, as a relatively oversimplified answer. It's going to depend on what software you use. If you are an Apple user and you use Final Cut as your editing software, go with ProRes RAW. It's going to give you the most direct integration into the software. Truthfully, I think ProRes RAW is the better format anyway. It has no noise reduction, so you get a much better file to actually work with than you do with Blackmagic Raw. But that's not to say that Blackmagic Raw is bad by any means. If you're using DaVinci Resolve, then you basically have to use Blackmagic Raw. ProRes RAW, unless you're using something like, I think it was Color Finale, has a plugin that lets you do the transcoding and then put it into Resolve. So you're adding a couple of extra steps there. So yeah, it's really one half dozen of the other between the two. Personally, I like ProRes RAW better, but I'm a Windows editor. I work in Premiere. Though that seems to be these days a little bit of a, why do you work in Premiere? But yeah, so ProRes RAW if I ever have to shoot RAW. Plus it's because usually I don't have a Blackmagic recorder readily available. Let's see here. Okay, so you are using Resolve, but you can use Final Cut. So you're really in kind of the best position for this. You get to choose which one you want to work with. If you can rent a Video Assist and a Ninja 5 and test footage from both, that's usually one of my best, kind of pieces of advice for people. See which one you like working better with. If you're working on a MacBook, you're going to have the advantage that Final Cut's way more directly integrated. Yes, Resolve and everything with the M1 chips, and they did the whole, making the integration better, but truthfully, Final Cut's still going to run better on a MacBook. So maybe use that to your advantage. File sizes are bigger on ProRes RAW over Blackmagic Raw, but, that's really just up to your own kind of workflow. And let's see here. Being a forward company, is Panasonic thinking about ND filters? The question's from Dwight. Hey, Alan, I'm going to get to that question. Actually, I'll get to Alan's question in a second. But Dwight, yeah, so I assume what you mean is internal ND filters in cameras. And one of the things that a lot of people, I think, have a misconception about is the space required for an ND filter to be built into a camera and the trade-offs that you have one way or another. Cameras like the box camera, we got a lot of people that gave us a lot of their opinions on the fact that we don't have a built-in neutral density filter in the BGH1 or the BS1H. And believe me, you've heard it from Matt and you'll hear it from me. I would have loved to have a variable neutral density filter inside of the camera, like most cinema cameras. But the fact is they just physically don't fit, and the tech is not there to make them small enough without having a penalty in light gathering. Any of the kind of fixed in place neutral density filters that are in cameras either use clear glass that really, it reduces your light gathering if you're using it. So the issue then comes in that you're always having to push your ISO higher, even when you're not using your ND. It would be cool if there were other kind of techniques for doing neutral density filters in cameras. And that companies are always looking into how they can make things better and better and better. Just as of right now, of course, every company, of course, we constantly talk internally about, what is possible. Can we do internal ND filters on cameras? Matt and I have a lot of conversations about that. So it's big. I would love to see it in cameras. It's just the tech's just not there yet. To also, let me caveat that. The tech's not there for cameras in the size that a lot of people are used to seeing for DSLM style cameras in mirrorless. Let's see, Alan, missed the start. Did you already talk about how you're streaming for 4K from the GH5 today? So I touched on it a little bit before. Actually, I kind of talked about it a lot. But yeah, so we are GH5 Mark II. I've got it USB tethered into my Galaxy Z Flip 5G. Down here in Austin, we're in one of the lucky areas that we have both 5G millimeter wave and we have sub 6 here. Actually, it should be the other way around. We have sub 6, which most places have, but more importantly, we have millimeter wave here, at least where I am right now. So that means that I can actually take advantage of the much faster speeds that 5G allows. So I get anywhere between, well, in this particular spot, I've got about almost 100 megabit upload on my phone. And that varies a little bit. If I move 20 feet to the right, that can drop down dramatically. Typically, if I'm going to be doing streaming, I look to have anywhere between 30 to 40 megabit upload, just to make sure that I'm safe on my headroom there. But yeah, it's basically the USB into my my phone, using my phone's cellular network as basically a mobile hotspot. But that allows you to do 4K 30p streaming at 12.5 megabit per second. So that's how you can get this kind of feature to it. The other nice thing with this too is that if you're someone who wants to use the 1080 60p streaming that you can use with 16 megabit per second, this will be the more reliable way to do it. You're not having to worry about crosstalk with the wireless connection back and forth. If you look at the last from the field stream that we did, where I was out over by Pennybacker Bridge, the reason I went out there was that there's much less interference from the cellular networks and from Wi-Fi, where here it works for the most part, but I can run into some challenges when it comes to just network interference here. And then, yeah, we're using the Leica 12 to 60 2.8 to f4 on my GH5 Mark II. I've got my Sennheiser AVX mics set up here, and then I'm using the XLR1 audio adapter to control my audio. Let's let's hear. FC says, I shoot video at 60 frames per second. When I convert it to 30p in post at regular speed, the video looks choppy. Should I be shooting at 30 to avoid choppy video at 30? Well, if you're shooting 60 and converting it to 30, one of the things you're going to want to make sure you're checking is what your shutter speed is. If you're shooting 60 and you're exposing, say, at 30th of a second instead of, 30th of a second instead of, 60th of a second instead of 1/120th, you could be causing issues where you're actually shooting 2 frames. But also, usually I've not really had any issues with taking 60 and converting it to 30. Software has gotten pretty good at being able to just throw out the frames that it doesn't need. Maybe some others in the chat can give you maybe a little bit better advice, but usually it's something like that. I would try to shoot either ProRes to do it. Just give yourself a little bit more of a chunky file to work with. Let's see here. Can you touch upon the new update for the GH5S and the DJI Rs2 and RSC2? Yeah. So with the ever-expanding updates that we're doing on all these cameras, we have been releasing for a number of our cameras that have the capability to do it, the active track integration with the DJI Ronin Rs2 and RSC2. Now, it has to be those 2 models for now. Basically, what it does is it uses the tether function from the camera to plug into the right into the gimbal. For some reason, I couldn't remember the word gimbal there. When you plug it into the gimbal, that allows you to, obviously, one, you can control the camera settings, and DJI has a list of what settings you can control from what camera and what level of integration there is there. But when it comes to the active track solution, it means that you don't have to buy the Raven Eyes system. Particularly, let me rephrase this. You don't have to buy the Raven Eyes system. The Raven Eyes system can give you added control for active track. Ours uses the 225 area and the face and body detection to tell the gimbal where it needs to move. So you're able to make sure that, if you've got the system set up, and I use an RS2, so it's a more simplified version, frame my subject up with the gimbal, pull the trigger once when I have the camera enabled there, and then that enables active track. That's all you have to do. At that point, it's going to use the face and body detection and the algorithms that we have in for tracking to tell the gimbal how to move and where to move. You can change the speeds. So on the RS2, you can go into the gimbal's control, either on the app or in the gimbal itself, and you can change how fast it moves. But yeah, I've done a couple of demonstrations with that actually when a couple months ago when we were back on a little bit of the trade show circuit, where we were able to actually just set up a BS1H on it as an active track with a longer lens. And it actually seemed to be a pretty cool solution for someone who's doing like stage performances. And you can set it up in the back of the stage with a long lens on there as long as you can balance it. And then just get the body detection, find the person, turn active track on, and as they move across the stage, the gimbal's going to handle keeping that person in frame for you. So that's really kind of the core of it. We have a list. If you go to our website, you can take a look. If you go to our global website that has all the firmware downloads and all that stuff, you can see which cameras have Active Track Edition in their firmware updates. Let's see here. TN, the Anamorphic on a Budget channel suggested a great feature, unlocking 24p in the S5's 6K photo mode or 4.3 almost full sensor readout, which pairs well with the new anamorphic lenses. Okay. So you're going back to looking at using the 4K photo modes as video modes. One big thing to remember about doing that, it's the same thing that we ran into when the GH4 came out, and we added 4K photo and people started using that as an open gate mode. Those are true Well, it's a true 30 frames per second, so 30.0. It's not 2997, and there isn't going to be a 24 frame for it because, as my knowledge, it's not really that big of a need for it from the photo side. Because it also, at that point, you've got different motion blur stuff, all things like that. But it is something that we can definitely pass on and, you know, kind of see what our engineers say is possible with that. Let's see here. I believe you need to be very careful with speed versus... Okay, yes. So back and forth with that conversation. Yes. So this is one of the cool things with these chats is, you know, you have all the conversations that go on in the stream here, and everyone kind of helping out with each other. As much as I do, you know, video production, there's a lot of people in here that do a lot more video production than I do, and could probably give you much better guidance in certain cases, especially this frame rate conversation. So let's see here. Mr. P, GH5 Mark II only streams in 2.4 gigahertz, but not 5G. It's impossible to maintain a wireless stream in 2.4. Can you elaborate on this decision from Panasonic? It's not impossible to maintain a stream in 2.4 gig. I do it all the time. Truthfully, a lot of it's going to depend on which connection is either set up as preferred on the mobile device you're trying to connect to or your home network. I've tested in my home network a number of times, and my Asus wireless router is connecting the camera in 5G, and it's wirelessly streaming when I want to do it for my home network. I will forcibly switch it to 2.4 if I'm streaming from another room, because of the challenges with 5G going through multiple walls, and I live in an apartment complex that's you know, it's an older apartment complex, so you run into, you know, what's actually in the walls and how thick are they and that kind of thing. So 5G tends to have some issues going through some of that stuff, or 5 gigahertz. But yeah, not sure I fully understand where your issue might be coming from, Mr. P, because it does work with the GH5 Mark II in pretty much all the scenarios I've tested. Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to talk about with this, because, you know, obviously we're talking a lot about video production, and yes, we're using the GH5 Mark II, and this is, you know, kind of the cool thing that we've got going on, but I wanted to talk about, you know, how do I use our cameras for streaming, or not streaming, for video recording, for productions. I get a lot of, you know, kind of requests about things like autofocus and, you know, what mode is best and how do you ensure that you're going to have good autofocus for the type of recording that you're doing. And truthfully, I have to say that that is going to be dependent on your style of shooting and what your just kind of setup is, you know, what lenses you use. Are you someone using adapted lenses? And it's just, you know, it's the challenge there. So for the most part, if you're someone who's going to be recording, say, like talking heads videos, so stuff like this, you know, right now the S5 is my go-to camera for a lot of this stuff. And truthfully, it's the f1.8 series lenses. I love how all of my notifications decide to go off right now. So yeah, the S5 is my primary camera that I use now for pretty much all of my you know, talking heads video production. 9 out of 10 times, I'm never doing clips longer than, you know, 5 to 10 minutes because I'm going to be stitching them together in post. Usually I will segment out, you know, if it's a 20-minute video, I'll segment out, you know, the topics and make sure that I'm shooting to put B-roll in, which I think the vast majority of you probably are using or already doing. So time limits don't become an issue. So that's why the S5 just becomes the perfect kit for me. I also typically don't have to worry too much about the type of clothing that I'm wearing. So it's usually a black polo or a t-shirt. So the patterning, you know, I don't really have to worry about moire. The bigger thing that really comes into it is, does the particular video that I'm shooting require shallow depth of field, or is it just a nice to have? A lot of times I think people get a little kind of overzealous with the super shallow depth of field shooting. We think every single thing needs to be shot that way, and that's the only way that it's going to look good. And truthfully, 9 out of 10 times, it probably doesn't look as good as we think it does, because it has to be so precise in a lot of cases. So because of that, like I said, that's why I'm using the f1.8 series lenses that we have. So the 35, the 50, the 24, and the 85. I have the 85 set up on this right now, and my 35 is still back at the studio attached to my BS1H that we normally are streaming on. So yeah, from there, then it's usually just figuring out what aperture I want to shoot at. I don't really use neutral density filters all that often. I probably should in a lot of cases. Like right now, I'm not using a neutral density filter, but we're in a fairly overcast. Actually, we're very overcast, so I don't really need to worry too much about that. So usually it's just camera, lens, and then just looking at my exposures. From the actual exposure side of this is where I look at and, kind of figure out, well, what is the end result for this? Since I'm making training videos, I typically don't really need to worry too much about color grading. It's an added step that really most people aren't going to really care too much about, especially for the type of content that I'm doing. So usually we're doing like 709 right out of the camera. Because this content usually goes up and lives on, a website for training. 709 makes it just nice and simple. I know that, as long as I'm shooting in the right legal range or my right luminance levels, I know that my exposure's set, properly. And most importantly, I know that I do my white balance correctly. I really don't have to worry too much about the post side of it. It's literally at that point just making sure my audio is good, making sure that my framing was right, and making sure that my frame rates matched up to what I wanted to actually shoot it at. And this is where some of it also really will diverge from a lot of, I think, the content that most of you are probably creating. We saw this conversation going back and forth about frame rates. 60 frames, 30 frame, 24 frame. Not everything needs or should be shot at 24 frames per second. A lot of times you have to look at, one, where is that content being broadcast? Where is that content being consumed? Is it an art video piece? Is it a wedding client video? Is it a corporate training video? Or even is it something for YouTube that is going to be targeting a YouTube audience? A lot of those things are going to come into play as to, well, what frame rate should you be shooting at? You also have to consider what you're actually filming. Like I said, most of the stuff that I'm filming is usually training video content. So it's usually showing people, how something works, or looking at, a piece of equipment and actually, kind of showing details of it. 24 frame, I'm sorry to say, but 24 frame is horrible for stuff like that. And the reason for this is that 24 frames per second is softer looking video because you have motion blur. You're shooting at 50th of a second or 48th of a second if you have the camera in 180 degree. So motion blur becomes a much bigger challenge. And if you need something to be ultra sharp so that it can be legible in video, you want to shoot it at higher frame rates and higher shutter speeds. You could do this in 24 frame and jack up your shutter speed, but then you get a staccato looking video. And usually stylistically, that actually just makes an even bigger disconnect. You also tend to look at situations where, where are most of the people going to be consuming the content? If you're someone who uploads online and you deliver online and it's for mass market, it's not necessarily wedding, stuff like that. I know I'm narrowing this group down. 9 out of 10 times people are looking at either 60p screens or on their mobile devices, which could be anywhere between 60, 90 to 120 frames per second as the display. Yes, they have variable refresh rates and stuff like that in some cases, but truthfully, 60 frame is going to most of the time look right on mobile devices. especially for training content. Yes, it does give you that benefit to slow things down, but it doesn't give you the benefit to slow things down if you're exporting out at 60. But that's where you can shoot at 120 frames and then slow it down to 60 and you get a 50% slow. So you have those options there. But yeah, 90% of the time I shoot all of my training talking heads videos at 60 frames per second. The other thing that you look at is, or that I typically end up going back and forth on, is whether or not I want to shoot in 4K or I want to shoot something in 1080 60p. A lot of this is really going to come down to, one, how important is the video? How long is it going to live online before I have to record a new version of it? And where are the people going to be consuming it? A lot of times if you're doing product training type videos and you're working more in maybe a corporate space where you're being contracted to film this kind of stuff, a lot of places have limitations on what resolutions they actually want you delivering. So one of the locations that we load content in, it's delivered in 720p, and 4K would be massive overkill for that. Not to mention taking 4K footage. Yes, I can take 4K footage, downscale it to 720, and it's going to look even better than 1080 downscale to 720 or 720 shot natively. But it comes down to, one, usually content that I work on that's spec'd out to be 720p. It's just usually I'm going to end up having to re-record or update those videos in like 3 to 6 months. So when something like that happens, I'm constantly refreshing this footage. There's not really a need for me to be shooting 4K most of the time. That means that I get to save on storage space. It means that I get to, shoot at higher frame rates and not have to worry about things like the Super 35 cropping. Even though as you use the cameras, that really doesn't become an issue. So, really just kind of judge where your project's going to. Now, a lot of times I will say, shoot as high of a frame or as high of a resolution as you can for archival purposes or for coming back to something later as resolutions change. But that's really more advice for wedding and event photographers, where that you may have a client come back a year or two down the line and be like, hey, we want to get a higher quality version of it. Or if you're in a business where your job is to sell your content, that's where you can be using things like 4K to say, this is an upcharge. I'm going to be shooting it in 1080. 1080p is the content that you get. If you want 4K, you're going to have to pay X number of dollars to get a 4K cut from it. Those are some of the different things that you can utilize with resolution. So yeah, let me look at some of these questions first before I talk about my focus settings that I use for the cameras. Autofocus is the thing that puzzles me most. When I bought an S5, I was watching all these videos of issues with Panasonic focus. Maybe it's luck, but my S5 focusing is great. Yes, there is a lot of, it kind of goes to like what I was saying before. There's a lot of circumstances that will change your experience with autofocus. And this is true for any camera. I don't care if it has phase detect or if it's our contrast or our DFD system. All cameras have scenarios that they perform better in and then scenarios that they perform worse in. There is a recent kind of rash of videos I've seen online from different YouTube channels that have very clearly moved to a full frame camera, and I know that they're in a certain brand's camp, and the videos are actually unwatchable to me because of either the missed focus that happens or the constant snapping back and forth because of either not knowing how to use the system or like I said before, trying to push that everything needs to be shot wide open mentality. So I'm going to talk about in a little bit how I set up my autofocus on my cameras, and then we'll continue with that. Jake asks, what's the purpose of the picture profile like 709? Is it like the natural profile? Kind of, yes. The Like 709 profile is designed specifically for situations where you know that you're going to be sending this to a platform that utilizes the broadcast standard, which is Rec 709. This is a much smaller color space and kind of gradients available than something like HDR content. 9 out of 10 times, if you're delivering on YouTube, you're exporting your end result out as Rec 709 anyway. Like 709 in the cameras just gives you a step further, a step closer to your final product to shoot in camera. The trade-off being that you do have to be more careful with how you shoot with it. You can very quickly blow your highlights out and they're gone because it's a baked-in 709 profile. This is where shooting something like log can give you a much better advantage because you can pull your highlights back and you can lift your shadows up a little bit more. So you have to judge your scenario. Natural is a 709 based color profile, but it's usually a little bit more punchy. So you may run into some challenges where it may look okay on your camera, and like the black shirt may look okay, but then when you actually load it onto YouTube, you see that the black shirt just completely crushes out, or the highlights completely blow out because they're actually out of range. And that's one of the challenges with natural. It can be a little more contrasty. Like 709 tends to be a little bit, at least from what modern standards are, a little bit flatter, but it's meant to be a basically shoot and deliver color profile. Many thanks for providing this forum. Of course, glad you're able to join us. Dji Rs2 says, in this environment, how do you prefer setting white balance with the color checker? Do you simply use custom white balance and hold the checker close, or do you care about white balance actually at the sitting position? So in this particular scenario, I don't really need it to be checking right here. I'm under a very overcast sky, so it's not really changing too much. And this is a YouTube video. I'm not necessarily super concerned with making sure that everything is critically perfect, because the content is what is driving here. Yes, the picture quality, stuff like that, that's always a major goal. I want to make sure that the content that I'm producing for all of you looks good too, and is up to what you would enjoy watching. Although at the same token, you can always just be minimizing this and listening to me drone on for an hour. That's your prerogative for everybody. But in a case like this, I use my color checker, and yeah, this is the photo one, but it's still a gray card. I just put it up closer to the lens, I do my white balance, save it to the custom one, and then just basically set it up. And as FC points out, an overcast sky is a gorgeous time to actually shoot stuff because it is a perfect softbox. It makes everything look much better. Shooting in harsh sunlight, yes, you can do it. It's a lot more complicated. If you've had to do it before, you're constantly chasing shadow to try to kind of soften that a bit. Or you're standing there with an assistant and they've got a giant gobo, kind of blocking light. But yeah, so I just hold it relatively close to the lens. What I can do is, kind of zoom in, set it up, and do it that way if you really want it to get closer to the subject. But we're soft enough light here that it's not really that big of a deal. Roger says, in the S5, the 10 slots for C3, I use all the time for different settings. 25, 50, internal and external recording. Would love to have that red recording frame in my GH5. I know a lot of people want red recording frame in the GH5. Unfortunately, from everything I understand, the GH5, it's an older processor. The amount of stuff that people want to have added to that camera I'd love to have it added there too. It's just probably not going to happen. GH5 Mark II came out because we hit basically the production wall with the original GH5. How much more we can wring out of that processor and sensor, really is the only reason why we came out with the Mark II of GH5. We've never done a Mark series in the GH line, And that kind of is the indication that, you know, we've tapped out what we can on that camera. I know a lot of people are going to be screaming either in the chat or in the forums, oh, but it's so easy to just add this or that feature. It's not. And if you have experience writing code for anything, you know all the things that can possibly go wrong when you try to do it. And the vast majority of people don't understand typically, you know, how much of the processors are being used for a lot of stuff. So that's not a slight to anybody. It's a lot easier to say than it is to actually execute. So let's see here. FC says, you love the animal and face detect autofocus and lace firmware. Yeah, so there's been a lot of those nice updates added. Actually, the sun is starting to come out. Let's see if it flares on this lens because I forgot my lens shade. Let's see here. When is the... So I will address this one. I don't have any information to share about GH6. I know everybody wants information about it. I want to share information about it. I want more information about it. I just don't have anything that I can share with you guys. So that's just why I'm not really addressing that question. So, cool. I think I'm good through those questions now. So, you know, just like we were saying before about autofocus and stuff like that with the, for talking heads type videos, for stuff like this. Because I'm shooting as a recap, usually I shoot 60 frames per second, whether that's 4K or 1080p, depending on the project that I'm working on. Means that, one, I can take the best advantage of our focusing system that I possibly can. Faster frame rate, faster readout, just more information being pumped into the algorithms for focusing. Because of that, it means that I've got a couple different choices that I will typically work with my autofocus. Usually I'm not shooting wide open. I will usually shoot anywhere between 1 to 3 stops down from wide open in the full frame because I can still get a shallowish depth of field. And I frame it up so that I know at least I've got a distant background behind me. I usually try to not shoot right up against a wall. Where you have to stop down, or you have to open up a lot more to force that separation. I try to use as much compression as I can in actually the environment to help with my kind of depth of field settings. So the vast majority of the time it's usually shooting at about 2.8. If I'm shooting with the 85, I will actually stop down to usually around 5.6. And I'm usually standing relatively close to the close focusing distance of that lens for framing. And it's usually about a waist up shot. So that lets me get relatively close to the lens and the frame. It lets me take advantage of the compression so I can force the background out just because of the focal length of the lens. And my depth of field is deeper, so cameras will have an easier time focusing when you've got a little bit more of a shallow depth or a deeper depth of field. When it comes to the modes that I shoot in, this is usually where I'm using one area or one area plus, and more recently now with the S5, I use one area with the human detection turned on. So, and that's the same thing that I'll typically do with the GH5 Mark II. And the reason for that is when I want to be able to do, kind of hands-free operations. So if I'm filming and I want to be able to move around, but I also want to be able to show something to camera when I'm using this setup. I want to be able to put something in the box and have it focus on that when my face and my body's not being detected. If you watch the Lumix live streams back in the studio and I show something to camera, that's how I'm doing it. It's one area autofocus and it's the face and eye detection. That means that, you know, if I wanted to show you this microphone, I'd be able to do this with the microphone, make sure it's on that box, and it's going to focus on the microphone, and then I'm set. When I pull it away, it goes back to face detection and focuses back on me. Out in the field with something like this, the other nice advantage with using the one area focus point is that if you lose the body, if you lose the face, anything like that that could trip up an autofocusing system, the camera defaults back to that one area box that you have, so that region that you've got the box pointed at. This becomes a nice tool if you're going to be filming yourself and then you want to turn the camera, or if you're filming other people and you want to be able to go from filming a person to then pointing at something, say like a laptop. You know where your focus is going to go. It's predictable. When you don't use that, and we would just use the full, kind of standard face and eye detection, that would default back to the 225 point, so the full area. That means that it's going to scan the entire image with the regions that we use and just say, okay, this is the best contrast, this is second best contrast, this is closer to the lens, this is further from the lens, and then it uses its algorithms to try to figure out where it wants to focus. You're basically saying, yeah, just focus wherever in the basic face and eye detection mode. Putting in that one area plus with face and eye detection turned on means that your fallback, if you lose a face, is one area. So it goes where you tell it to go. The other tip that I can provide for a lot of this stuff is don't use the smallest AF box in one area. I usually go 1 or 2 clicks larger, and that depends on the distance that I am from the camera. At a distance like this, I'm about 2 clicks larger than the smallest one area box, so that the box is probably about this big on my chest. That gives me that ability that, I've got more than enough of an area that it's sampling. Excuse me. Large enough area that it's sampling so that I can, confidently know that if for some reason I lose my face detection or body detection, the box that I have is big enough for the range to actually be able to see and tell me where it's got to go. Let's see here. I'm late to the live. Is there auto exposure, ISO, or shutter settings on? I see some slight stepping in the image, but overall exposure is a little hot on the skin. Yeah, so I have it in shutter priority, and I have it trying to actually force. It was supposed to be 1/3 over. It's actually set at 2/3 over, so give me 2 seconds. This is the other nice thing about this setup. I can just come in and adjust this stuff while we're doing streaming. Let's see here. Yeah, so what was it? Yeah, so the autofocus modes, making sure that I'm using one area with face and eye detection, and that is really kind of narrowed in, at least for my style of shooting and the content that I'm creating. That's given me the best result where I 100% trust our autofocus system is going to do what I need it to do when I need it to do it. And I've yet to really run into a problem with pretty much anything. If I'm using adapted lenses, this all changes. If I use adapted lenses, typically I'm going into manual focus because a lot of the adapted lenses I use to start with are manual focus anyway. They're old Leica M lenses, stuff like that. But yeah, it's just a little bit of a, kind of difference there. Let's see here. So hopefully I knocked it down to plus 1/3, and it's mainly because we keep having sun come in and out. And when it's all flat, everything, because I've got such a black shirt, it usually tends to crush things a little bit, because of the super high contrast there to here. So trying to overexpose it a little bit, but brought it down a little bit. South Motion, is that your bike behind you? What is it? Yeah, that's... Which shoulder? That shoulder. Yeah, that's my bike. It's a 2019 Honda Rebel 500 in orange. I like bright colors. Yeah, it's a fun bike. If anyone's into motorcycle riding, it's super fun. And there's a reason why I actually have it back there in frame. Because it kind of, to me, exemplifies the whole purpose of mirrorless cameras. While, yes, we have larger cameras. We have, to the points I was making before, we have cameras like the S1H, we have the S1s, the S1Rs. They are bigger cameras, they are heavier cameras. Our system, our entire ecosystem, whether you're in Micro Four Thirds or in the S series, you've got compact versions of the cameras and you've got large, kind of more what I would call production ready type cameras. And for someone who has very limited space to be carrying equipment, like on a bike, you know, trying to find the right combination of kit for your style of shooting and your kind of lifestyle, so we're getting into a lifestyle conversation here, can be challenging. You know, I typically, when I go out to shoot something, I'll usually have 1 or 2 cameras with me. I'll have at least 1 tripod with me, and I've got 2 different tripods here. This is just an old Mi Photo travel tripod. I don't use this one that often because it's a little lightweight. Primarily, I use my Peak Design travel tripod, which has basically done everything that I needed to do, especially in my cross-country trip recently. So there's a whole bunch of different options that you have there. That means that I have to be very selective with things like the lenses that I use. GH5 Mark II, like we said, I've got my 12-60, 2.8 to f4 on there. I've got my XLR1 audio adapter. I've got my Sennheiser AVX microphone. And I've got a couple of batteries with me. When I go out to shoot, I will typically shoot with 2 to 3 batteries, no matter what camera I'm shooting with, just because it's usually the much, you know, kind of, it's more peace of mind for myself. Even for my helmet cam here, I've got, you know, a second battery here as well for that, because those things chew through batteries like crazy. And usually I am carrying something like a USB battery bank as well. All these cameras these days can charge over USB. So that means that I can charge my GH5 Mark II, I can charge my S5, I can charge my helmet cam, I can charge my phones. And it's all just, you know, there with me. The other thing that I have to look at is, well, the microphone solutions that I want to bring with me. If I'm going to be recording videos out in the field, I got to figure out which microphones I want to take with me. My S5 right now is set up with my a Sarmonic Rf System. So this was given to me by Todd. So thank you, Todd, one of our local ambassadors here. This system has been solid for me when I don't want to be carrying around the XLR1, when I want something that just plugs right into 3.5 millimeter mic input. The coolest thing with this is that if I'm doing something where I'm doing an interview with somebody, it's got 2 transmitters, 1 receiver. So I can have channel A, channel B, and it allows me to just have both people mic'd up. It's one kit, I'm good to go. If I'm traveling and I need to be, you know, maybe for my ears, maybe a little bit more reliable system, maybe a little bit more of a, you know, kind of I want to go XLR, that's where I use my AVX system that I have here. And this thing has been amazing. I've had this particular AVX for probably going on 5 years now, and the thing's just been a beast. It's worked in pretty much every environment, save for Cinegear. Those that watch the Cinegear stream, you know what I'm talking about with audio. Trade shows, it was a little challenging, but that gives me my XLR option, and it's a really small compact kit. The downside is that if I want to have a second setup, I'd have to invest in a whole nother set, plug it into the second XLR channel, and you see where it's going with that. So yeah, primarily for audio that we're using, it's either going to be the Sennheiser AVX or it's going to be the Sarmonic TX9 and RX9. I think it's an RX9. Yeah, this system here. The other thing that I typically bring with me is I'll usually always bring a laptop when I'm going to be out shooting, and just simple USB hub. And then as far as media goes, because I get this question a lot, is, you know, what media do I use for my cameras? I am pretty much exclusively now, unless it's in my S1R, I exclusively use the ProGrade 256 gig V90 cards. These are the newer revised ones, so these are the current new ones that you can buy. And I will always be shooting with 2 cards. In this case, it's 2 256 gig cards in my S5. And I can already hear some people, you know, about the fact that the S5 has a UHS-1 and a UHS-2 slot. So what's the purpose of that? Faster memory cards, even if your camera has a slower card slot in it, faster memory cards mean when you offload the footage later, you get to take advantage of the faster offloads. slower cards, you're capped at what those slower offload speeds are. So it can definitely help with some other stuff. Let's see here. I use Panasonic Micro Four Thirds and full frame for long distance bicycle touring. Weight is critical. Even full frame by Panasonic is so portable that I believe I will stick to Panasonic for a long, long time. That is great to hear. Yeah, our mirrorless cameras, we've got a solid option for pretty much anything that you'd want to shoot with. Oh, and FC, I guess you've seen some of the posts that I made a while ago about trying to get a BGH1 and a BS1H on my bike. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe it's just coincidence. But yeah, I am still working on a project to hard mount BS1H and BGH1 to my motorcycle for some, kind of anamorphic moto vlogging style shots. It's a long time work in progress, finding the right dampening solutions, because I also want to do it in a little bit more of a cost-effective method. Let's see here. I think you said in earlier live streams that the S5 charger doesn't work as a constant power, but it does, at least in Sweden. I've used it for live streams. It's great. No, so you can charge the S5 over USB, and you can run it for long term. I believe in one of the conversations we've had about it before, it's going to depend on the power bank that you're choosing. If you're going to be doing it over a USB power bank, basic rule of thumb with power banks: if our cameras say that they can charge and power deliver over USB, make sure that you see in the specifications 9 volt 3 amp. 9 volt 3 amp is one of the USB PD delivery specs. And that's what triggers properly on the camera to say that I've got enough power coming in, I can provide power the entire time, and I'm not going to have to be like trickle charging. On the S5, you can run into where this will extend the battery life on an S5, but you will still run your battery down depending on the mode that you're shooting in and how you're shooting. It's a little different in the S1H and the S1R and the S1. But yeah, you just make sure that it says 9 volt 3 amp and you know that you've got the right spec for it. It's one of the nice things with our cameras. You don't have to have a USB PD device to charge your camera. There seems to be conversations these days about, cameras that are limiting what you can use to charge your camera over USB. We don't do that. You can use backwards compatible chargers. I have a power strip at my desk that has like 4 USB type A ports that are all, I think, 5 volt 2 amp, whatever the previous spec was, that I just have a bunch of those USB cables coming up, USB-C, and when I want to charge a camera, when I want to charge this, when I want to charge a phone, I can just plug the stuff in there. Yeah, quick charging's fun and it's really nice, but you don't necessarily have to. Roger says, the charger that comes with the camera. Yeah, so the S5 should be able to with that. And as you're saying, it looks like you're able to do it. David C. says, is there an update for the Lumix app plan so that seamless focus pull is possible? Not that I know of, but it's something that we can pass on to our team to have them take a look at and see what they can do with seamless focus pulling. Let's see here. Oh, wow, it's already 2:15. So we've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. Make sure that I got everything covered. So yeah, that's pretty much the setup I do. Training videos, it's probably going to break some people's brains, but a lot of times actually now, I'm also getting into having to record vertical content. If you are against vertical content, probably the best thing I can suggest to you is look at where the vast majority of content is being consumed these days. We did a live stream a couple of weeks ago with Fritz Bacon from Imagine, where we talked about TikTok and Instagram stories and a lot of those platforms that can be a really, really good tool for advertising your brand, reaching new customers, and even just if you're an artist and you do this more for like the fine art side, sharing your passion with others and finding new people to collaborate with. Those platforms want vertical video. We've got the tools built into the cameras to shoot and capture vertical video. and it makes it super easy, so I can just and record it. But you do also have the guidelines to crop it vertically. So I am starting to find that there are situations where recording a vertical video actually is becoming a little bit more of a request. Some of the stuff that I've shot for local bars and restaurants around here, they've asked for some vertical video and vertical stills because they want to be able to post this stuff quickly to their Instagram stories. Yeah, so let's see here. I got time for one last question, and then we're going to call the stream today. So let's see here. Basil says, are the S-Series cameras capable of sequence composition? I believe they are. I just have to remember where it is in the menu. I know that sequence composition is a function from 4K photo in our cameras. So let me see here. The S cameras might actually not do sequence composition. I know that that's something on the GX9. I will have to look a little bit more into that and get back to you on what the S-Series cameras are able to do. Let's see here. I find it especially hard to avoid perspective distortion vertical. Perspective distortion is very hard, very easy to create in vertical video shooting. So you typically want to make sure that you've got everything vertically, kind of aligned properly. It's going to become something that everyone, I think, will eventually have to have, or you'll have a client ask you to do it. So not necessarily embracing it, making, the point that, this is what we're all going to shoot, but embracing it as a way to actually make money and utilize it as a tool can be an amazing thing to keep yourself ahead of others. It's a very competitive market. It's a very competitive industry. Anything you can do to make yourself stand out from the next person is going to be better. If you're looking to do work for bigger clients, bigger companies, having the ability and being open and kind of supportive of vertical shooting is going to be the difference between you and somebody else who may be pitching for the job. Let's see here. If only sensor cameras, if only square sensors, that's a whole nother conversation about square sensors, people wanting that kind of stuff. Last thing I'm just going to answer here is how effective is AF on near and AF far settings for the AF lock? They can be incredibly useful, primarily more for photographers. If you're shooting and you know that you always have to be shooting out at a distance, or you know that you always have to be shooting near, it's the similar concept that we used to do with lenses, and some of our lenses have it with focus limiter switches. It can be an incredibly useful tool. You just map two separate buttons. Usually on mine, I map one of the front buttons to far and the rear AF on button to near. Cool. With that, thank you everybody for spending time with me. Guru, which color checker? Color checker passport. It's a really old one that I got to replace. Thank you everybody for tuning in this week. This was a lot more fun, especially over the last couple of weeks, and as we're kind of planning the rest of December out in our streams, and also trying to make sure that we get some holiday vacation time in there. We will be back live next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to be back in the studio. Still working out the topic on that one because I have 2 weeks worth of videos I have to pre-record. The last 2 weeks of the month are going to be pre-recorded streams as we prepare for the CES trade show, and as I kind of work on some of the other aspects of what I do for Panasonic here, and basically getting ready for just the next year. Taking some holiday time with my family here in Austin. So look forward to seeing you all next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but we dropped all the links down in the description for things like our Instagram channel, for Lumix Pro Services. Be sure to go take a look at those things. Lumix Pro Services is the free platform here in the United States, Lumix Pro Red is free. If you own a Lumix camera, get registered. You should be registered. If you're not already registered, you should go register. It's free. The Platinum series, that's if you're someone who utilizes your cameras maybe a little bit harder, or you're just someone who likes to have a much better peace of mind with your equipment. You can get all the information down in the chat. If you're looking at wanting to continue these conversations, follow us over on Instagram. If you want to see the setup that I have here for how I shot this, go check out our Instagram stories. Feel free to interact with us over there. I check it fairly often. It's been about every other day I get into the chat and I kind of answer people's questions. Outside of that, yeah, thank you everybody. I'll see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks.